Hey guys, Riley Owen here. Doing an ASMR video because somebody recommended that I do a book reading, you know? So that's what I'm going to be doing, okay? That's what I'm going to be doing. So here I got one of my favorite stories of all time, if not my favorite, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And so we're going to be reading. There's a spider on the wall. We're going to be reading a chapter. Well, not a chapter, wherever I left off, in the middle of some chapter. I was reading this last night, so here we go. He could see the corridor. Let's see what chapter this is. We'll start at the beginning of the chapter, which is chapter 14. I'll just skip back a little bit. Mr. Willy Wonka. Mr. Wonka was standing all alone, just inside the open gates of the factory. And what an extraordinary little man he was. He had a black top hat on his head. He wore a tailcoat made of beautiful plum-covered velvet. Wacky, eccentric look. His trousers were bottle green. His gloves were pearl gray. And in the one hand, he carried a fine, gold-topped walking cane. Covering his chin, there was a small, neat-pointed black beard, a goatee, and his eyes were most marvelously bright. They seemed to be sparkling and twinkling at you all the time. The whole face, in fact, was alight and fun with laughter. And oh, how clever he looked! How quick and sharp and full of life! He kept making quick, jerky little movements with his head, cocking it this way and that, and taking everything with a loose and taking everything in with those loose, bright, twinkling eyes. He was like a squirrel in the quickness of his movements, like a quick, clever old squirrel from the park. Suddenly, he did a funny little skipping dance in the snow. That's so funny. And he spread his arms wide, and he smiled at the 5 children who were clustered near the gates. Then he called out, "Welcome, my dear friends. Welcome to the factory." His voice was high and fluty. Fluty? Will you come in forward at one at a time, please?" he called out. "And bring your parents. Then show me your golden ticket and give me your name. Who's first?" The big fat boy stepped up. "I'm Augustus Gloop," he said. "Augustus!" cried Mr. Wonka, seizing his hands and pumping down with terrific force. "My dear boy, how good to see you! Delighted, charmed, overjoyed to have you with us. And these are your parents? How nice! Come in, come in. That's right, step through the gates." Mr. Wonka was clearly just as excited as everybody else. "My name," said to the next child to go forward, "is Veruca Salt." "My dear Veruca, how do you do? What a pleasure this is, and you do have an interesting name, don't you? I always thought that a verruca was a type of wart that got on the soul." I almost was about to quote the movie Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I always thought a verruca was a sort of wart that got on the sole of your foot. I just gotta do the laugh. Yeah. How to do it. If you know, you know. "But I must be wrong, mustn't I? How pretty you look in that lovely mink coat, and I'm so glad you could come. Dear me, this is going to be such an exciting day. I do hope you enjoy it. I'm sure you will. I know you will. Your father? How are you, Mr. Salt? And Mrs. Salt? Overjoyed to see you. Yes, the ticket quite in order. Please go in." The next 2 children, Violet Beauregard and Mike TV, came forward to have their tickets examined and then have their arms practically pumped off their shoulders by the eccentric Mr. Wonka. At last of all, a small, nervous voice whispered, "Charlie Bucket." "Charlie!" cried Mr. Wonka. Well, 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 so there you are. You're the one who found your golden ticket only yesterday, aren't you?" "Yes, yes, I read all about it in the morning paper." helpers. Just in time, my dear boy. I'm so glad. I'm so happy for you in this. Your grandfather? Delighted to meet you, sir. Overjoyed, enraptured, entranced. All right, excellent. Is everybody in now? 5 children? Yes, good. Now, will you please follow me? Our tour is about to begin. But do please follow me. But do please keep together. Please don't wander off by yourselves. I shouldn't like to lose any of you at this stage of the proceedings. Oh, dear me, no. Charlie glanced over his shoulder and saw the great iron entrance gates slowly closing behind him. The crowds on the outside were still pushing and shouting. Charlie took a last look at them. Those gates closed with a clang, and the sight of the outside world disappeared. Here we are, cried Mr. Wonka, trotting along in the front of the group. Though this is through this big red door, please. That's right. It's nice and warm inside. I have to keep it warm inside my factory because all of the workers, my workers, are used to an extremely hot climate. They can't stand the cold. They'd perish if they went outdoors in this weather. They'd freeze to death. But who are those workers? Asked Augustus Gloop. All in good time, my dear boy, said Mr. Wonka, smiling at Augustus. Be patient. You shall see everything as we go along. Complete lie, right? He only shows him like 5 rooms. Ridiculous. That's a disappointment. Are you all inside? Good. Would you mind closing the door? Thank you. Charlie Bucket found himself standing in a long corridor that stretched away in front of him as far as he could see. The corridor was so bright and wide the cat could easily have been so wide that a cat could easily have driven along it. Had been driven along it. The walls were pale pink. The lighting was soft and pleasant. How lovely and warm, whispered Charlie. I know. And what a marvelous smell, answered Grandpa Joe, taking a long, deep sniff. And the most wonderful smells in the world seemed to be mixing up in the air around them. The smell of roasting coffee and burnt sugar and melting chocolate and mint and violets and crushed hazelnuts and apple blossoms and caramel and lemon peel. And far away in the distance, from the heart of the great factory, came the muffled roar of energy as some monstrous, gigantic machine was spinning its wheels and braking at breakneck speed. Now this, my dear children, said Mr. Wonka, raising his voice above the noise, this is the main corridor. Will you please hang up your coats and hats on those pegs over there and then follow me? That's the way. Good. Everyone ready? Come on, then. Here we go. He trotted off rapidly down the corridor with the tails of his plum-colored velvet coat flapping behind him, and the visitors all hurried after him. It's quite a large party of people when you come to think of it. There were 9 grown-ups and 5 children, 14 in all, so you can imagine that there was a great deal of pushing and shoving as they bustled down the passage, trying to keep up with the swift little figure in front of them. Come on, cried Mr. Wonka, get a move on, please. We never get around today if we dwindle like this. Soon he turned right of the main corridor, and another narrow passage appeared. Then he turned left, then left again, then right, then left, then right, then right, then left. The place was like a gigantic rabbit warren, with the passages leading this way and that in every direction. Don't let go of my hand, Charlie, whispered Grandpa Joe. Notice how all of these passages are sloping downstairs, called out Mr. Wonka. We are now going underground. All the most important rooms in my factory are deep down below the surface. Why is that? Somebody asked. There wouldn't be nearly enough space for us on top, answered Mr. Wonka. These rooms are going to be enormous. They're larger than football fields. Nobody building in the world would be big enough to house them. But down here, underneath the ground, I've got all the space I want. There's no limit so long as I hollow it out. Mr. Wonka turned right. He turned left. He turned right again. The passages were sloping steeper and steeper downhill now. Then suddenly Mr. Wonka stopped. In front of him, there was a shiny metal door. The party crowded round. On the door, the large letters, it said, "The Chocolate Room." Alright guys, so that's the video. If you're not asleep by now, it's probably because of the bright light around me. I feel like there's two types of people when they watch ASMR.